Chapter 5 in Navigating Early by Clare Vanderpool. Early continued writing numbers on the chalkboard as he told his story of Pi, but the talk of stars had taken me back to the one place I didn't want to be, the creek near our house with the late afternoon sun dancing on the water. After the survival outing. "Come on, Jackie," Mom had said, trying to perk me up. "Let's skip some rocks. See if you can get 4 skips with one." "I might get lost," I grumbled. "Oh, you're just a bit out of sorts. You'll find your way next time." "Fat chance," I said. "I can name every constellation in the sky, but put a few clouds in the way and I get lost. A lot of good stargazing does." Mom tilted her head back and looked up at the sky. "Sounds to me like you're getting ahead of yourself, Jackie. That's like expecting a young lady to do your laundry before you gaze into her pretty eyes." I looked at her, confused. "You're jumping into the navigating part too soon. Maybe you should focus on the beauty of those stars up there, apart from their function. Just take them in, admire them, stand in awe of them, before you expect them to lead the way. Besides, who's to say that one group of stars belongs together and only together? Those stars up there are drawn to each other in a lot of different ways. They're connected in unexpected ways, just like people. Who'd have thought your father and I would make a pair? Me, a farm girl from Kansas, and him, a Navy man from the East Coast." She smiled at the retelling, even though I'd heard the story from both of them over the years. My mom had met my dad in a chance encounter. He'd spent some time in California and was heading back east to finish his last 2 years at the Naval Academy when his train got held up for some repairs in my mom's hometown. He got off the train to stretch his legs, just as my mother was delivering a cake to the Granby house to celebrate their new baby. My dad had said, "What's a fella gotta do to get a cake like that?" "I guess you'd have to have a baby," my mother answered, grinning to beat the band, my dad would say. My dad smiled a smile that went into tomorrow, my mother would say. And that was the end of that, they both would say. He walked her down to the Granby farm, offering to carry the cake, missed his train, and they were married the next month. My dad put aside a military career, which didn't sit too well with his father, John Baker I, and lived the life of a farmer for the first 9 years of my life. Then Hitler started bombing England, and the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and all HE double hockey sticks broke loose. He joined the Navy and shipped out before Christmas that year. He left me in charge, giving me the navigator ring and saying, "Take good care of your mother." I didn't see him again until my mother died. "We're part of the same constellation, your father and I," Mom said that day. "It's just not one that you find in any textbook." "That's a nice story, Mom, but it's not exactly going to help me find my way out of the woods," I told her. "Sometimes it's best not to see your whole path laid out before you. Let life surprise you, Jackie. There are more stars out there than just the ones with names, and they're all beautiful." Listening to my mother was a lot like reading poetry. I had to stretch my mind to make sense of what she was trying to get across, and even when I did understand, sometimes I tried not to let on. Gradually, I realized that the click-clack of chalk had stopped and been filled with the white noise of the record player. Sitting on the floor with my back against a file cabinet, I must have nodded off. Looking up, I saw the chalkboard full of numbers streaming out from the original 3.14. The numbers, Early had said, were a mother, a father, and their son, Pi. Had I really heard this story or just dreamed it? Either way, it was a silly notion that these numbers told a story. And Early, that strangest of boys, was now sitting on his cot beside the record player. But instead of watching it spin, He was busy tying a rope in an elaborate knot, so engrossed in his work, it was as if that rope and its knots also had a mesmerizing story to tell. Sorry, I said, clearing my throat. I must have dozed off. That's okay, said Early, without looking up. The next numbers aren't as good as the beginning. Pi just sails on the open seas a while before anything happens again. I don't think you'd like that part. Okay, I said. Well, thanks for the clothes. I'd better get back to the dorm. Early was too engrossed in his rope and knot making to even notice me leave. I didn't see Early for a week. Not that I was looking for him. My mother would not be happy about that. She had a knack for pairing me up with every misfit and newcomer. Jack would love to have you come over and play, she'd say without having heard any such thing from me. For my 10th birthday party, she said I could invite 6 boys to the bowling alley. But there ended up being 7 because Melvin Trumbolt had just moved to town and supposedly didn't know a soul. I fought her on that point as Melvin got in trouble the first day of school for flushing all the toilets in the boys' bathroom one after another. And I knew he was well acquainted with the principal. But she made me invite him anyway, and he turned out not to be so bad, especially when he gave the name Melvin and started especially when he gave up the name Melvin and started going by Flush. I got sucked into his antics a couple of times, but Mom could never get too mad, as she was the one who'd forced us into being friends. The point is, she wouldn't be too happy with me not inviting Early to join a table at lunch or play ball after school, but my mom wasn't here to watch over me. Besides, I was the new kid this time, and people weren't exactly banging on my door until about 5 o'clock one morning when someone was doing just that, banging loud and insistent. I was still coming out of a hard sleep when the pounding continued on the next door over, and then the next one. "Let's go, gentlemen, crew call," an adult voice boomed. I poked my head out the door. It was Mr. Blaine, the math teacher. It was a school day, but no one had said anything about 5 a.m. math class. He was dressed in gray sweatpants and a hooded sweatshirt with the Morton Hill crest on the front and the word crew underneath. Was he getting us all out of bed to be the kitchen crew or the latrine crew? Just then, Sam Feeney poked his bleary-eyed face out of his room. "Hey, what's all the racket about, Mr. Blaine?" "It's about rising to the challenge, Mr. Feeney. It's about discipline and strength. It's about working as a team." "Really?" Sam muttered. Because by my clock, it's about 5 a.m., which is about an hour and a half before my alarm's set to go off. He stretched and, yawning, said, "Which means I'm about to go back to bed." "Time waits for no man, Feedy. Suit up." Emerging from my dorm room in my own Morton Hill-issued sweats, I finally clomped down the stairs. I made it out of the building and was the last one to catch up with the other 8th grade boys on their walk down to the calm inlet called Wabanaki Bay. By the time we reached the water, the boys were all full. The boats were all full, with groups of 2 and 4 boys to each boat. Those sleek vessels had names painted on the sides like Torpedo and Jerry Runner and Spoiler. By the time I set foot on the swaying dock, the only boat left was the weather-beaten vessel named the Sweetie Pie. "All aboard, Mr. Baker." Mr. Blaine extended his hand with a flourish, as if the Sweetie Pie were the flagship of a magnificent fleet of rowing vessels and not some sorry, saggy swamp bucket like it appeared to be. "This is my boat?" I asked. "Yes. I know she looks a bit rough around the edges, but she's yar," he said before moving on down the dock. "Yar?" I repeated. I stared at the boat with its 2 seats. My face must have screamed confusion. "Don't you know anything?" Robbie Dean said. "Your boat's a double, which means it's for 2 people. And you're the last one here, so you'll have to row it as a single." He took up the rowing position in his boat, which was a sleeker and obviously designed for just 1 person. But what does yar mean? I asked. Quick to maneuver, easy to handle. Quick to maneuver, easy to handle, I repeated. Got it. Now remember, this isn't a race, said Mr. Blaine. We're just trying to get our legs pumping. So let's get you out and see what we have to work with. One by one, the boats were pushed away from the dock. Most were two-man boats. Robbie Dean and Sam shoved away from the dock in the jerry runner, while Preston Townsend occupied the only other single, the spoiler. I watched as they glided through the water, straight as arrows, their bodies moving forward and backward, legs pushing, arms pulling in one fluid motion. Mr. Baker, let's see how you fare. You know how to row, don't you? Sure, I said. It can't be that hard, I thought. My arms and legs were strong from swimming and bike riding, even though I hadn't done much of either after everything with my mom. I eased myself aboard and tried to position myself in the seat, hoping to catch up with the other boats. Quit messing around, Baker, hollered Mr. Blaine. Turn around and get moving. Turn around? I looked up, expecting Mr. Blaine to yank me out of the water and put me in a beginner's rowing class with the sixth graders. But he was studying his clipboard and seemed to mistake my bumbling for messing around. I guess I had told him I knew how to row, but I didn't think he'd believe me. Another boy rolled his eyes. You don't face forward. See how they're rowing? You face backward. Backward? I turned around. This time my feet found their place and I started rowing. Backward. In a direction I couldn't see. Still, it was a big bay, nothing really to run into. I hunched forward as far as my body would reach and gave the oars a mighty heave. Mom always said I was as strong as an ox, and an ox had to be stronger than anything they had around here, like lobster and shrimp. I'll be fine, I told myself. My heart began pounding, and for the first few strokes, I felt a thrill of gliding through the water, until I realized I was veering off course. I tried pulling a little harder with the left oar and veered off course even more. Must be the right oar. I tugged and pulled. Yar, quick to maneuver. This boat isn't quick to do anything except go off in the wrong direction. Slowly, I veered back toward the center of the bay. Uh-oh. Too far the other way, and so it went. Too far this way, too far that way. I zigzagged back and forth across the bay. As I made a wide turn to head back, I saw that most of the boats had already arrived at the dock. Well, I could still make a strong finish. There's no shame in coming in last, as long as your head's up and your tail's not between your legs. 3 guesses who said that. I think it was his mom. I had the dock in sight, as much as it could be, as I strained to look over my left shoulder. The other boats were already out of the water. What was maybe a 10-minute row for the other boys had taken me twice as long. The rowers stood on the deck watching me make my approach. My shoulders and back ached, and my legs shook violently each time they crunched forward and pushed back. Even my hands were clenched, so tight on the oars that I didn't think I'd be able to pry them off, but I would finish, and it would be over. I was already rehearsing my finishing line. It took me a while to figure her out, but she sure is yar. Finally, I pulled the sweetie pie along the dock with a scraping noise that sounded like a cat on a midnight prowl. Preston, Sam, Robbie Dean, and the others all watched with pained grimaces on their faces, waiting for the boat and the noise to come to a stop. I stood up and felt the evil sweetie pie pitch left, then right, and before I could say Jack Tar, I was upended in Wabanaki Bay. There were a few chuckles and shaking of heads as the boys lifted the remaining boats onto their shoulders and headed to the boathouse. I took my time getting out of the water, as I was not eager to catch up. Mr. Blaine extended his hand and gave me a lift. It's all right, Baker. I guess you're not as experienced at rowing as you let on. We'll work on it for next time. Next time? That's just what Coach Baynard had said after the incident in the pool. That's what Mom had said after my next survival outing. How many next times would there have to be? Here, help me get her out of the water, said Mr. Blaine. I lifted the boat, but wasn't sure how much I helped. I'm sure one of the boys will help you carry her to the boathouse. I've got a faculty meeting in a few minutes. He patted me on the back. You'll get the hang of it next time. See you in math class, Baker. Mr. Blaine walked briskly up the dock. Yes, sir, I said, glad to be left alone. I stood dripping and shaking like one of our old barn cats, glaring at the source of my contempt, the sweetie pie. I gave her a swift kick and toppled her onto her craggy side. Yup, she sure is yar, if by yar you mean wobbly, easily tipped, and likely to throw you in the drink. I will be back with Chapter 6 in our next video. Thank you for listening.